Come on up, Michael. Thank you, guys. Thank you. As Sandy said, we are going to be having a conversation this evening with a good friend of mine who is running for the spot of Attorney General in California. I'm going to introduce Michael in just a second and give you a little bit of a background on him, and then we're going to start having our sort of interview conversation. But there's a reason why we felt this one was so important to start off with. This specific race is very unique to us here in California. Now, I have, as most of you have heard me before, I'm a passionate defender of the Constitution. This is something that seems to be lacking in California politics, okay? I've always said that probably the two most important political positions in California is probably the Attorney General and the Controller, okay? The Controller knows where all the fraud is taking place, right? But the Attorney General really has an opportunity to affect how laws are not only interpreted, defended, but how they apply to us, right? MichaelGates has a real shot. I mean, not just there's a real possibility. No, this is a race. This is probably the first time, realistically speaking, within a generation, where we might actually have the possibility and the unique situation of manifesting where California, well, it may not flip completely red, it may turn a way deeper shade of blue, right? Or deeper shade of purple would be a better way of describing that. So to give you a little background, and correct me if I'm wrong on some of this stuff. So Michael was a city attorney for Huntington Beach, still lives in Huntington Beach.
Yep.
And then you did federal work as well.
Yes.
We want to mention that.
Yeah, so I was the city attorney of Huntington Beach for 10 years. I was elected in 2014, re-elected in 18, and again in 22. And in Huntington Beach actually elects their city attorney. Most cities do not, but Huntington Beach does. So it's a fantastic experience that I know we're going to get into. But in 2025, in the middle of my third term, the Trump administration offered me a position to come back to Washington, D.C. to work at the Department of Justice. So it was an opportunity I could not pass up. It was pretty remarkable. It was to work as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the United States Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division. So,
doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, I know that's a mouthful, but that's the highest level you could serve at the DOJ without being Senate confirmed. So it was a very, very high level position. Those positions are just not easy to come by. They're very rare. And so I responded to the call in early 2025 and actually went back to Washington, D.C. But I left a family here, so married almost 30 years. In fact, my wife and my 29th anniversary is on Monday.
Oh, congratulations.
If I'm thinking of the calendar correctly. Yeah. And so, so 29 years, 5 kids, 4 grandkids. So I basically was leaving a lot to go back to Washington, D.C. So it proved to not be, easy and frankly, at the end of the day, it wasn't sustainable. So I wrote to Pam Bondi and told her, I said, hey, I need to go back to Huntington Beach to be with my family. But I also knew I wanted to run for Attorney General. So
I want to pause you on that one.
Yeah.
So what was the thought process that said, now is the time? Now I need to take this position on?
So I had thought about Attorney General. So first of all, I want to make this abundantly clear. I am not a career politician. I'm not a professional politician. I was an elected official in Huntington Beach. But if you ask the folks in Huntington Beach, and if the Orange County folks know what Huntington Beach did or what I did there for Huntington Beach, I was just a blessed lawyer with incredible opportunities just to fight for everyday Californians. So I saw myself as the top lawyer for the city and a fighter for everyday Californians who lived in the city. I did not see myself as being a career politician or looking for the next step up. Having said that, in 2024, before I went to DC, Steve Hilton had approached me and said, look, I think I'm going to be running for governor. I'd like to put a team together. Would you consider running for Attorney General? At that time, I started to think about it, but I wasn't serious about it. So I would talk to my wife and we would sort of imagine what that would look like, what the opportunity would be for a city attorney running for Attorney General. So I just started to, lay the mental groundwork for that possibility. And then I got the offer from the Trump administration. So then I put all of that, obviously, I don't know if it's on hold or I just, sort of canceled those plans. Right. And then I was in DC for a year. But after a few months of working in DC and knowing that opportunity was unsustainable, I started to revisit those ideas because I'm like, look, I'm going to go back to Huntington Beach one way or the other. It's just, what am I going to do when I go back? So am I going to go into private practice? Am I going to go back to the city of Huntington Beach and take up the fights that I had been fighting for before? Or should I revisit this idea of AG? And at that time, in the summer, late summer of 2025, there was some talk that Rob Bonta, who is our current Attorney General, that he might run for governor. So if you mix all that up, it's, in my mind, I was thinking there might actually be a real opportunity when I go back to California to run for Attorney General. Well, I come home, I start laying the foundation because I'm hearing now, yes, he's running for governor for sure. And that means it's an open seat. So I would be probably the leading candidate for that open seat. And then obviously he pulled back and decided to run for AG, and we can get into why he made that decision because I have plenty of intel on that. Yeah. But I thought, what, even though he's staying in the AG's race or running for re-election, I thought, and this was my calculation after talking to my wife, and my wife and I pray a lot about, what does God have in store for us and what is the next move, what should I be doing? And so after prayer and conversation with her, and then also some people in the sort of the political arena, they were like, no, it's probably better to run against Bonta than it would be to run for an open seat because of all of his baggage. So and I know we can get into that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, most of the people that are in this audience have been the direct recipient of a lot of that baggage, right? And I guess that gets into sort of a basic question about your viewpoints on the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
We already know you're a strong supporter. Yeah. But where does that foundation come from?
So I've been conservative my whole life, registered Republican my whole life. I was born in the Midwest, came to Huntington Beach when I was a kid with my family when my dad got a job at McDonnell Douglas back in the early 1980s. So just a conservative household. I will be completely candid. We were a conservative household, a rule of law household, a constitutionalist type of household, but my family, none of us ever owned guns. So I didn't come from a gun-owning family. It was just generationally, like nobody in my family had ever owned guns, even though we're all patriots, we loved America, we believed in the Constitution, our constitutional rights. So we just had never owned guns. So to answer your question, it came from my conservative background for starters, but it really developed when I got my education, went to law school, started to really learn and appreciate our constitutional rights. And that's really where it flows from, or it stems from. And I was telling you earlier, I'm a strong believer in the Second Amendment on the one hand. It's not a belief, it's a constitutional right? But I'm an advocate for it, I'm a defender of it. And really for two reasons. I believe that everybody should be able to own guns. I do now own guns as of COVID, thank you very much. Yeah. I'm a proud gun owner.
Gavin Newsom made a lot of people gun owners.
Yes, I know. So I believe in people's right to defend themselves and to even from the government, right? I believe in that. But I also, because I'm a constitutionalist, I am just a strong advocate for whatever the Constitution has to offer, regardless of whether I was a gun owner, right? So whether y'all, and I know y'all do because of where we are, but whether people choose to own guns or to get into the culture or to develop a habit of firearms and shooting and whatever they want to do, regardless of that, I'm an advocate and passionate for it because it's a right, it's a constitutional right. And the government, I think in our education system tells us these constitutional rights, they're not that important, or they're outdated, or they're ridiculous. They're second-class rights, right? But for me, it's like, nope, they're all in the same level playing field. The Second Amendment's no different than the First Amendment, and even the First Amendment in California is under attack, I know. And we can talk about that too. But no, Second Amendment is as rich, fruitful, present, active, operative, as any other constitutional provision. And so I'm a constitutionalist and I'm just a strong, we keep saying believer. It's not a belief. I'm advocating because it is what it is. You don't have to believe in it. It exists.
Let's talk about that nexus, though, because you will effectively be the top law enforcement
Yes.
officer
Yep.
for the executive branch of government, right? But the real driver of unconstitutional laws is the California Legislature, right? And every year, it seems like they regenerate more and more unconstitutional laws. Everybody here is most likely familiar with SB 2, which then we got recodified out into AB 1078. And you actually had the judiciary, you had the Ninth Circuit specifically telling the legislature these specific sensitive locations are unconstitutional. And the legislator's response was to simply reintroduce them in another piece of legislation. So they generate toilet paper, okay, for lack of a better term. And your office is typically charged with defending these unconstitutional laws. So how do you square that circle as Attorney General?
So we could get into a whole nother program on this topic because this is something I happen to know a lot about, and I think the general voting population really frankly knows nothing about. The legislature and the governor frankly take way too much heat, in my opinion, for the lawlessness that we see in California. Because the legislature, a lot of them are advocates, they're pushing the envelope, okay? But we have a system in California with the independent attorney general who is supposed to be the referee and supposed to be policing these things. The attorney general is not only the top law enforcement officer in the state of California, and we think of criminal law, the criminal justice system, but he's also the chief legal counsel for all the executive and all the state agencies. So the Attorney General is supposed to be coming to the legislature saying and counseling them and admonishing them that what you're doing is unconstitutional. Our Attorney General now and the recent predecessors have just not done that. And so what we have is basically a runaway legislature, and they're always pushing the envelope because there was a supermajority. So they basically, with a governor who's going to sign whatever they do, whatever they print, he's going to sign it. And so it's runaway. We have a runaway legislature, just like we have runaway agencies, right? Whether it's CARB or Coastal Commission, AQMD, these are runaway agencies, administrative and regulatory agencies that the Attorney General is supposed to be there to be calling balls and strikes on what they're doing. And like literally saying you can do this, you can't do that, right? But we have no adult in the room. We have no referee.
Well, you have right now a passionate anti-gun advocate that doesn't seem to be conflicted in completely abrogating the Constitution,
right?
And spending a lot of money defending unconstitutional laws.
So let me put it this way. So Rob Bonta is a career politician. He spent 10 years in the legislature before Governor Newsom plucked him out of obscurity. He was basically a nobody, a no-name, but he was a career politician in the legislature, plucked him out of obscurity and dropped him in as our Attorney General, as an appointed Attorney General, when Becerra got a job with the Biden administration. So he was a career politician, and he's still a career politician. He's not really operating as a lawyer. In fact, he's never really spent a day in a courtroom. I have, and if we can get into that.
Yeah.
I've done tons and tons of cases, and I'd love to get into that just to share my credentials. But that's what you have right now is a career politician, and he has literally got so much responsibility, and yet he's just not doing his job. And because of that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not afraid to say this. I have said this on the campaign trail for 6 months, and I see some of my team in the audience. They can testify to this too, George and Linda as well, that we are lawless in California. We are now a lawless state. We are lawless. Anytime you can have a piece of legislation pass in California like we did yesterday with the Stop Nick Shirley Act, which is a square affront to our constitutional rights, our First Amendment rights, whether it's free speech, you view it through a free speech lens or freedom of the press lens, it is an assault on our First Amendment rights. Where is, and by the way, that was sponsored by Mia Bonta, Rob Bonta's wife. She's a legislator now. She was appointed to fill his vacant seat, by the way, by Newsom. So we have lawlessness because Rob Bonta won't stand up and say, no, you can't do that. So now the governor literally is probably going to sign into law a state law that couldn't be clearer about its violation of the First Amendment. of our and so that's just one example. I can give you many, many, many others. But we are lawless in California. We are not following the law. You mentioned your example of him not following the law. He's also AB 1955, the state law from 2024 that basically mandated that teachers keep secrets from parents with regard to their children's gender identity and gender transition issues. That went up on litigation, went up through the court system. It went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court issued an order that basically said that the state cannot enforce AB 1955. Rob Bonta is ignoring it. Mm-hmm. So we are a banana republic at this point. We are a lawless state. So all of that falls on the Attorney General, ladies and gentlemen. If we are a lawless state, what do you want the governor to do about it? What do you want him to do about it? He can't do anything. Issue another executive order? Like, what is he supposed to do about it? It is the Attorney General who should be doing something about it. He should be issuing opinions. He should be giving direction to his state agencies. The Attorney General also, ladies and gentlemen, this is important to know, that there are 58 counties in the state of California. The Attorney General has purview over all 58 sheriff's departments and all 58 district attorneys' departments. So literally all law enforcement agencies throughout the state of California ultimately answer to Rob Bonta. The fact that we ever had a George Gascon in LA who was soft on crime, or a Chese Boudin up in San Francisco, the fact that those two ever existed in a way where they were operating, that they were soft on crime or not enforcing the law, that's Rob Bonta's fault. Mm-hmm. You know, people blame George Gascon, and I say, but you should be blaming Rob Bonta. He allowed that to happen. The Attorney General has so much authority in the state of California that when I'm Attorney General, if I ever have a resistant district attorney again, I get to set them aside and reach down and prosecute those cases myself.
Well, and I guess that brings up another question, because you do have ultimate prosecutorial authority, right?
Exactly.
And one of the things that we have seen is that a lot of law-abiding gun owners are oftentimes targeted by anti-gun politicians, right? Especially some of our brothers and sisters in Los Angeles that have been dealing with that for several years, right? Many people live in jurisdictions that are very, I wouldn't say reluctant, they understand that there's shall issue from a CCW standpoint, but they'll drag their heels. LASD had to get sued in order to do that. What can the Attorney General do to dissuade anti-gun district attorneys from bringing forth prosecutions for minor offenses?
Well, yeah. So on the one hand, it's just direction to them. So I can give direction to the district attorneys about what our enforcement priorities are, what our enforcement is going to look like throughout the state of California. It's even my job to make sure that the laws are consistently enforced throughout the state of California. So I can write to them directly. If they don't abide by my direction, I take them off the case.
Easy enough.
I seize the case.
No.
It's my case. It suddenly becomes my case. And so I have really total control, ultimate control over all of that stuff. And look, back to the Second Amendment, and we were talking earlier, there's a lot that we're going to do in California when I'm AG to make California Second Amendment compliant, because at this point, I think it's pretty safe to say that California is anything but Second Amendment compliant, right? So just look at any example. So there's a lot of work to do going through state statutes that are potentially violative of the Second Amendment. There's a whole host of things, but one quick and easy example I give to my audiences, and just to demonstrate how serious I am about my defense of the Second Amendment, my advocacy for the Second Amendment, my advocacy for your constitutional rights, is that on day one when I'm AG, I have a whole list of things I'm going to do on day one. My day one's going to be very, very long. There's a whole host of things I'm going to do. But one thing I'm going to do, specifically as it relates to Second Amendment, is, remember I said I have purview over all 58 sheriffs in the state of California. Every sheriff in the state of California on day one is going to get a letter from me that basically says, and clearly says, that if their departments are not issuing concealed carries within 90 days, they're in violation of the Second Amendment. So I'm going to draw a clear line in the sand. Yeah. I'm going to draw a very clear line in the sand, and it's going to be clearly communicated to them, and that's on day one. I'm not talking in the first week of the first year. Literally, I've got a list of things I'm going to do on day one. That's on my list of to-dos, that every sheriff is going to be told what I believe the threshold is in order to protect our citizens' Second Amendment rights. And so that's obviously really important to me.
I would respectfully also suggest you look at ongoing litigation.
Absolutely.
And decide whether or not you're going to continue to,
Yeah, there's a list of ongoing litigation. You know, the list goes on and on. But That's just one easy, clear example, for audiences who may not be as savvy as your audience about Second Amendment and what's going on in California, because what they also don't know, and you probably do know this, is that there are jurisdictions like Los Angeles where it can take anywhere from 9 months to 3 years to get a concealed carry. 3 years. 3 years. So, and that's after thousands of dollars in application fees paid and all of these hours of classes and training taken, and they keep moving the goalpost and delay. Well, that's just the government using process to violate your Second Amendment, to deprive people of their right to bear arms. So that's going to come to a screeching halt on day one when I'm Attorney General.
One of the other things that I've always been curious about, especially from people that become high-level government attorneys, right? So for the audience, we little legal Latin just to make you feel intelligent, okay? There's effectively two types of criminal laws. There's one that we refer to as malum prohibitum and another one called malum in se, all right? If it's something as malum in se, we know that it's bad. We know it's evil. Murder would be a good example of a malum in se, law. Malum prohibitum, the only reason you know it's bad is because somebody had to tell you that it was bad. Okay, having an AR-15 that's not California compliant, it's a felony, right? But you wouldn't know this sort of with a priori knowledge. Right now, we have a lot of enforcement agencies that are spending an inordinate amount of time focusing on malum prohibitum offenses. Yeah. As a result, you have a boatload of malum in se things that are taking place. We see it almost every night in the news, okay? Are you committed to redirecting the prosecutorial direction of these offices to focusing in on actual violent crime rather than law-abiding citizens who have effectively become status criminals because the law changed underneath them?
1,000%. 1,000%. That's the short answer. The long answer is, and broader than Second Amendment issues, is that there are 1,200 attorneys that work for the California Department of Justice, and the Attorney General is obviously the CEO or the director of the department. And so those 1,200 attorneys are working on various things. There are, most of them right now, as I sit here, I know they're working on all of the wrong things, right? And so I am going to go in and reorganize. For instance, just a quick for instance, 200 of those 1,200 attorneys are working on Trump administration cases. And that's $40 million a year in salaries to you to pay for them to fight the Trump administration, just to give you an idea. And so what I'm going to do is, when I set my priorities and we stop going after law-abiding citizens and we start going after criminals, and we go after the injustices that are occurring, including, let's be honest, discrimination that's occurring that we see in our universities and things like that, the anti-Semitism. This is stuff that, you wouldn't know this because these things are happening in California, but the civil rights, or the California Department of Justice has a civil rights division. But you wouldn't know that because there's so much going on that makes the news. And I think it's deliberate. I think it's deliberate. I think there's a deliberate effort to not ensure or enforce civil rights laws so that these things do erupt and make headlines, because I feel like there's an agenda there. And we're going to get back to enforcing the law, going after criminals, going after injustices like discrimination in all forms, right? Especially honoring the recent U.S. Supreme Court decisions. And so, absolutely. That's what, if you want to ask, look, we heard about your first day. What does your first 100 days look like? My first 100 days is, reorganizing the department and making sure that we are getting back to basics, protecting the constitutional rights of everyday Californians, going after criminals, working, yes, with federal agencies to make sure that we're going after the fentanyl issue and their human trafficking, but also the immigration, allowing the feds to enforce immigration. Remember, if people say, you can't do that, how can you do that? I have control over all 58 sheriff's departments. So I'm going to make it happen.
Call the shots.
I'm going to make it happen, right?
So what do you think, I'd love to sit there and have the evil man behind the curtain, right? And we can say, well, Bonta has this sort of wicked political agenda to ultimately collapse Western civilization and blah, blah, blah. I always think that gets a little dangerous. There is an agenda. What do you think his agenda is?
Well, if you can imagine this, he's ideologically, politically, he's further left than Newsom. So he is a believer in his positions on things. He has recently sued, because I think he thinks it's good politics in California. He has sued hospitals recently, including a children's hospital, to force them against their will to perform trans surgeries on minors. And that's the kind of stuff on day one that's going to end. I'm going to dismiss those lawsuits, obviously. And I'm going to go further. I'm going to let the medical community know that if you mutilate a child, I will prosecute you. Right? Yeah. So, but that's just an example of, he's a believer. I mean, and he knows that if he just keeps basically pushing the envelope on his crazy policies, nobody's even keeping an eye on him, right? And the legislature is a supermajority in his favor, and he's always had a governor in his favor. This is the danger of one-party rule. This is really the danger of one-party rule. We've had this for almost 20 years, right? It's been 16 years of one-party rule, and we have seen the crazy of California get crazier and crazier as the years go by. And I think we can all agree that it's gotten worse in the last 5 years. And what has happened in the last 5 years, Rob Bonta has been in office for exactly 5 years. If you look at the waste, fraud, and abuse, for example, that has amassed to nearly $500 billion. Estimates are, safe estimates are $425 billion, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is $22,000 per taxpayer. $22,000 per taxpayer. That's what the waste, fraud, and abuse is up to. That has been calculated over the same 5-year period of time. So quite literally, ever since Rob Bonta has been in office for the past 5 years, California has gone to hell. So it's a disaster now. It's an absolute disaster right now.
And as the top prosecutor, you've got a moral obligation to look into this after you become.
100%.
Yeah. So
100%.
that's good to know too.
Yeah. Well, and we can talk about a lot of issues, whether it's waste, fraud, and abuse, the Second Amendment, child mutilation, Title IX compliance, election integrity, federal immigration enforcement, whatever the issue is. At the end of the day, and I tell people this too, after I've served as your Attorney General and I leave office, if people don't remember, if they remember me for only one thing, I want them to say, that man returned California to a law and order state. We are going to get back to law and order.
Well,
absolutely. Oh yeah.
No, I mean, that's excellent. That's excellent to hear. So when you look at the California political landscape, and we're going to not really talk so much about the Second Amendment per se, although that obviously is an overarching concept here, but politics is the art of the possible, right? And many of us have written off California, all right, as being a hermetically sealed laboratory where you can introduce Marxist policies and see how bad they actually are. Now we're competing with Mandami, I suppose, in New York. So, but with that kind of thing, we've had massive amounts of wealth fleeing the state of California. I mean, we just don't have the types of opportunities that we did. What has changed that made you say, now is the time? Now, was it just that things have gotten so bad, or is it, no, there's actually a pathway that we win?
So I think the answer is both. And so I've been in politics for many, many years, a couple decades or more, and helping other candidates, been in myself, analyzing these things. Obviously, I was I don't know if you folks know who, as city attorney, what I did there, and I had a lot of support in Huntington Beach. My approval ratings were in excess of 75% because I was a fighter for everyday Californians in Huntington Beach, but I was also in touch with the community. I knew what the issues are, I knew what the sentiment was. And Huntington Beach was not always a conservative city. In fact, in 2021, I was the conservative city attorney, and I was working with a 6-to-1 far-left liberal city council. And they were always after me, trying to investigate me for this, that, the other thing, defaming me in the media. Anyway, the bottom line is, I've been in this environment where I have a pretty good sense of what's going on. In my humble opinion, California is right now in the perfect position to be rescued. And I don't think that's just, I've also been a political realist too. And I've been able to read things. I knew, I was calling it when Trump got elected in 2016. I had said he's going to win this election. And everybody said, no, he's not. I said, yes, he's going to win. I knew Biden was going to win. I knew Trump was going to win again. I mean, I study these things and I know these things. I think California right now can be taken back. That is not to say it's going to flip red. No. It is going to get new leadership, like with people like me, even with a heavy Democrat Party registration. Because even Democrats are fed up with California. Here's how I know. Really three things. One, if you look at the past few years, so George Gascon and Chelsea Boudin got tossed out of office. San Francisco and Los Angeles are two of the deepest blue counties in the country. And the deep blue voters in those counties, LA and San Francisco, threw out their Democrat leadership. Okay, that's for starters. When that happened, that's when I'm like, wait a second, the winds are slowly changing, right? Then you start looking at the polling. The polling right now says that 65% of respondents to these polls say that California is headed in the wrong direction. Pollsters and analysts always look at that question. That question is in every single poll. It was in all of Trump's polls. It's in every Senate poll. It's in every congressperson's poll. Is your jurisdiction headed in the right direction or wrong direction? That question is the most important question in every single poll, because that tells pollsters and analysts if there's going to be a change or if it's going to be status quo. That's the predictor question. 65% of respondents in California consistently have been saying that California is headed in the wrong direction. That is telling pollsters and analysts that change is coming. Now, I don't know what the change is. I hope it's me. But it says that this is a change election. By comparison, in 2022, which was also a gubernatorial election, the number was 40%. So 25% more people believe that California is headed in the wrong direction. That is a very high number, and that means change is coming. So you have that. Then, and things are a little different now with the governor's race, but for months I was saying to people who were looking for some hope in this election, this hope for change, I would say, then also look at the governor's race. The governor's race says a lot about public sentiment, and has said a lot about public sentiment for months. Kamala Harris looked at this race and decided not to run for governor. Senator Padilla looked at this race and decided not to run. Caruso decided not to run. Bonta decided not to run. Our lieutenant governor, Eleni Kounalakis, who had tons of money and support, decided not to run. Why are all of these high-profile figures looking at this race and deciding not to run? Because they did polling, and the polling wasn't there to support their candidacy. That speaks volumes. And then for months we had Chad Bianco and Hilton leading the pack in the polls. So all of these things, ladies and gentlemen, are adding up. And now what are we seeing? That early voting among Republicans is higher than ever. It's outpacing Democrats. It's 30% higher than it was in the last election, 2024. So all of these things tell me that the environment is right. And then if you look at my race specifically, Bonta is a terrible incumbent. The Attorney General's race, the results are usually far more competitive than your typical 60-40 split of a statewide candidate. So governor, 60-40, insurance commissioner, 60-40, lieutenant governor, 60-40, but the Attorney General, it's usually much more 50-50. Steve Cooley lost to Kamala Harris, I think it was 2010, by less than 1 percentage point. It's usually far more competitive. And then you look at Bonta, he's spent $500,000 on criminal defense attorneys because the feds were asking too many difficult questions. He's tied to a bunch of corruption. I don't know if you know this much about Rob Bonta, but it seems like all of his friends are being federally indicted. Whether it's Andy Duong or Mayor Sheng Tao, the former mayor of Arcadia, Mayor Wang, federally indicted. I mean, all of his friends are being federally indicted. Okay, and then you add me to the mix. And normally your Attorney General candidate who stands before you is just a career criminal prosecutor. They'll stand here and tell you, I've spent 30 years at the DA's office or 15 years with the federal government prosecuting crime. But they're kind of, single issue candidates. They've been criminal prosecutors. I was a criminal prosecutor too in Huntington Beach, by the way. This is important to note. California is one of the most dangerous states in the union. If you look at the FBI data on violent crime, California ranks 6th, highest in violent crime in the entire country out of 50 states. That's Rob Bonta. You look at Huntington Beach is ranked in the top 10 safest cities in the state of California out of nearly 500 cities. We're one of the very safest cities we're one of the safest spots in the entire state of California to be in Huntington Beach. So I have fought crime. I was the one who fought crime in Huntington Beach and got it to be one of the top 10 safest cities. But I've also done elections law. I even had a Second Amendment issue in Huntington Beach. State mandates, whether it was the COVID lockdowns, the COVID shutdowns, we fought those during the COVID era from Huntington Beach. I fought for parental rights. I sued the state to recover millions of dollars in tax money that it wrongfully withheld. I've done all kinds of stuff, right? I even sued the state over its sanctuary state policy in 2 different lawsuits, the state and the federal. The federal case is still going. So I've done a lot of different things that appeal to a lot of different voters. So I think I'm probably Rob Bonta's worst nightmare in terms of a challenger. Yeah. I mean, and by the way, not only have I tried many multi-million-dollar cases, I actually spent, while he was 10 years in the legislature, I spent 10 years in court, actually as a trial attorney. And I argued at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the State Court of Appeals, federal district courts throughout the country, including for the Trump administration, and I'm actually admitted to the United States Bar. So if I was called upon to go back to Washington, D.C. and stand before the U.S. Supreme Court, I could go and argue a case because I'm actually admitted to the United States Supreme Court Bar. Excellent. So I'm a real lawyer, and so that's a threat to Rob Bonta, and that appeals to voters. They want a real attorney as AG because we're such a mess in California. They're tired of the career politicians. They want a real lawyer, so I'm hearing. And so I think that, I think we're going to do well in this election.
Well, it is interesting.
Very well.
Yeah, so I will say, just from what it's worth, I remember having a discussion with a friend of mine who's a Superior Court judge who used to work for the Department of Justice. He said that when he was a young lawyer working for DOJ, the amount of people in the legislature, and I'm going to ask you a question about the legislature here in a second, but the amount of people working in the legislature, I think he said it was like 90% were lawyers, okay? And there were liberals and there were Republicans and everything else, right? But 90% of them were lawyers. Now that number has dwindled down into the single digits. There's Shakespeare said the first thing we do is kill all the lawyers, right? Well, unfortunately, there's an unintended consequence to that, right? So you have, community activists, you have political activists that have no fealty to the Constitution whatsoever. And up until at least present day, they have a supermajority, okay? Steve Hilton wins the governorship.
Right.
You are the Attorney General. Right. And yet you have an anti-constitutionalist supermajority legislature. They're generating laws with override vetoes, okay? With veto override capabilities. How do you deal, procedurally, how do you deal with that when a law is passed that clearly violates the Constitution? Do you simply tell them, we're not going to be enforcing it?
Yeah. So it's complicated and easy. It's complicated because there's a few different avenues and a lot of moving parts. It's easy in that I will be fighting those things. I can sue to challenge the law, but if it's violative of the California Constitution or violative of the U.S. Constitution, I will also be writing to our governor. So assuming in that I have a friendly and supportive governor, I can go to a governor like Steve Hilton and say, look, this law is violative of the U.S. Constitution or violative of even the California Constitution, and therefore issue an executive order to suspend enforcement. So I can take immediate action without litigation to do that. Now, they may try to sue me or somebody may try to sue to stop that. Okay, sue me. I've been sued before. I'm happy to go to court and fight through this. But I can work directly with a friendly governor. If I don't have a friendly governor, obviously that option's more or less off the table. But I can still be challenging the laws that are passed. But more than that, I'm going to have a bully pulpit, right? I'm going to be able to issue Attorney General opinions, formal opinions. That is, if you don't know about how this works with Attorney General opinions, they are not binding legal authority, but they're probably the most persuasive thing you can bring into court. And actually, as a party in court, oftentimes I would cite Attorney General opinions because oftentimes you want to educate the court on what the Attorney General thinks the state of the state law is, right? And so you want to use it as a persuasive piece in order to influence the judicial decision or the outcome. And so I will be issuing Attorney General opinions. I will take to the bully pulpit. I will hold press conferences and shame them. I'll do whatever it takes. Why? Because I'm independently elected. I don't work for them. I work with them. And hopefully they heed my advice, my warnings, and my admonishments. But if they don't, then I'll take them to court, or I'll work with the governor to suspend enforcement of those laws.
Excellent.
So I'm going to be very, very aggressive and utilize every tool in the toolbox to make sure that we put them in a box, that we restrain them so that they're not doing things that are unconstitutional or violate our constitutional rights. And I'm going to have the well-being or the interests of everyday Californians with me in mind in Sacramento, and I'm going to be fighting for everyday Californians. I assure you this too, I am not going to go to Sacramento to make friends. This is not one of those things where it's like, please vote for me so I can get there, and then I get there and now it's a good old boys club or whatever where, now I'm enjoying my life up there. That is not it at all. If anybody knows me or my work in Huntington Beach, they know that I went into the China shop to break stuff. I did not go into the China shop to not break stuff. You got to go in sometimes and break stuff in order to fix stuff. What does that mean? It means I'm not going to be making a whole lot of friends. I will be making some enemies, but I know I will wear that as a badge of honor because I know that that means I'm doing the right thing. I'm returning California to a law and order state, and I'm serving the people of California in the best way possible.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I will say, I just want to put a plug in here, politics runs on money, okay? You've had people that have been backing you. You're successful as a fundraiser, but that doesn't end, right? So, we were talking about this before. People will say they're going to vote for you, but that's not enough, is it?
California is so big, it's appreciated, but that's hopefully the beginning of a relationship where people who want to provide support, offer support, that they can bring in some more support because it's about growing the team, right? California is so massive, 58 counties, 482 cities in the state of California. There's a lot of outreach. So what I often tell people is, look, thank you for the vote. Please help get the word out. If you could tell 20 of your or 30 of your friends and neighbors about me, make sure they vote, right? We don't want any apathy out there or complacency. Make sure they vote. But then also if you can make a contribution, if you can make a donation. We've raised over $1 million so far just since January, which is remarkable. But if I'm going to take on the machine, if I'm going to take on Rob Bonta, if I'm really going to have a meaningful shot at rescuing California in my small way as Attorney General, it's going to take millions of dollars. So my goal is to raise another $5 million by November. So it's very ambitious, but in my estimation, if I have those types of resources in the war chest, we will be very effective at getting the word out. The best way to reach, a few hundred people or 1,000 people in a city council race is to door knock and to show up to town halls. The best way to win a statewide race is different. It's to be able to spend money on paid social media ads, paid TV commercials, paid radio. That way you reach millions of people, and that takes money.
Which is, and I don't think there's any shame in that. Like, we can talk about the concept of having to pay for politicians to run for office, but that's just the way our system is set up.
It's an investment in rescuing California.
Yeah, and I think there's legitimacy to that. I want to go back to the Second Amendment as we sort of get towards the end of this part of the question and answer. So, is it possible, and I actually don't know the answer to this, right? Is it possible to populate the Department of Justice? Right now, we obviously have Bureau of Firearms lawyers, okay? And most of them at least appear to be advocates for anti-gun policies. Is it possible to have an actual civil rights division oriented, populated by solid Second Amendment scholars that are looking at California gun? We have probably the most extensive body of gun laws, regulations, and local ordinances in any jurisdiction within the United States. It's going to take an insurmountable amount of time. Thank God we have AI now that we can speed up this process. But it's going to take a lot of scholarship to be able to go through that. You are able to do that?
That's a fantastic question. So when I inherit the office, there is going to be a lot of entrenched employees who have been there for 10, 15, 20 years, mostly under this one-party rule. So there's a lot of sort of homogenous thinking there. They drink from the same Kool-Aid, So I'm going to have to work with that. What I get to do is I get a layer of political appointments at the top. So I immediately get to bring in some people at the top to start working through all of that. When it comes to inheriting sort of entrenched government workers, I'm also not a stranger to that. I did that in Huntington Beach. I inherited a staff and even all city staff not friendly to my election, not friendly to my priorities, and so I had to work through that in Huntington Beach. And then I also did it with the Trump administration when I went back to work at the DOJ. All of those people were Biden holdovers. All of the staff were Biden holdovers, right? So I've had to do this. I will do this. So the answer is yes, we will have some turnover. But in addition to that, what I plan to do, because I know I don't know everything and I want to get it right, is I'm going to invite councils or committees. We'll figure out what to call them and how they're going to be structured. But I want advice from experts. I want advice from the community on various things. The oil industry. I want to meet with a group of experts and owners in the industry, in that sector, so that we can meet quarterly or once a month and just talk about their issues. The ag industry, same thing. The tech industry, same thing. Law enforcement. When it comes to police practices and police issues and law enforcement priorities, I want to hear from them, directly from them, as we meet quarterly or monthly on what issues need to be addressed. What do I need to know about your issues? And so I plan to do that same thing with the Second Amendment and have experts like yourself on these committees, on these commissions, whatever it is, so that we sit and meet quarterly, monthly, and talk about these issues and work through these issues. And if you have resources that you can bring to the table where they can help us actually roll up their sleeves and get through some of the hard work to make things right, I welcome that as well. But this is going to be a bit of a team effort. I will not go to Sacramento and get sunk by the existing staff and atmosphere. I'm going to stay above it. I'm going to bring in reinforcements, and it's going to be reinforcements as part of my hired team, but it's also going to be reinforcements from the community and from the expert arena in different sectors. And we're together we are going to make California right again.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Absolutely outstanding. I think one of the biggest issues we've got right now is, again, it goes back to the level of complexity. We've tried to create a web where the laws are so convoluted, so complex, and then to a large extent, we've removed a lot of judicial discretion, right? I mean, we were talking about, one of my cases earlier on before the audience joined us. We had a client that effectively did not break the law, right? Absolutely, unequivocally had a legitimate self-defense claim, but because there was no judicial discretion, he could not afford to go to trial. And he had to plead to a lesser charge that would not have a legislative mandated prison sentence. Does your office have the power to look at that type of thing?
Absolutely, and that's one example. There are others, even when it comes to the high-density housing mandates. There's an administrative process to challenge those numbers, those high-density numbers, the RENA numbers, if you're following housing and housing mandates. There's an administrative process, but it's through the same political system that basically mandated those numbers on the city, so it's pretty ineffective. And then there's no recourse to go to Superior Court. To me, that's unconstitutional. Everybody, even if there is preliminarily an administrative process, once you exhaust those, you should be able to have recourse through the Superior Court system. And so I absolutely will be doing that. And I will even intervene into cases as an intervener to try to get the court's attention to say, hey, an intervention is when the state believes that it has an opportunity or a right to interject itself into a case that it was not otherwise even in. It's between two private parties, but they're arguing about state law, or there's some issue, some debate about the state law. I can intervene and tell the court, this is what I think the state law is. So I'm going to use intervention in a lot of cases where the state would not otherwise even be a party to those lawsuits, so that I can start correcting course when it comes to the way the judiciary is handling our cases, and hopefully start sending signals to the legislature that they need to start cleaning up some of those laws as well.
How, realistically speaking, and look, I'm going to be quite blunt, you're a better man than I am, okay? If I were in your position, looking at the Attorney General position, understanding the complexity of California, and look, I focus on one area of law. You are being put in a position where you have to focus on an entire arena of law, right?
Yeah.
Is that a 5-year job? Is that a 4-year job? Is that you spend the rest of your life doing this kind of job? Do you have to groom your replacement? Because the last thing in the world we don't want in California is you to be the speed bump that at least caused the freight train to slow down a little bit, but then continues going.
So again, if you know anything about my work in Huntington Beach, so I'm very, very ambitious. But I've delivered on my ambition. I've not been ambitious and not delivered. I've delivered on my ambition. Again, look at Huntington Beach and all the work that we did there, even changing the political environment there, the political leadership. I made a decision in 2022 that I was no longer going to go along or put up with this 6-to-1 council. So I used my political capital as an elected official in Huntington Beach, and I ran conservative candidates and got them elected. So we went from a 6-to-1 far-left council to a 7-0 conservative council because I ran with 4 city council candidates in 2022, and I ran with 3 more in 2024, and we completely flipped the entire council. So my point to you is, no, we are going, when I say we're going to return California to a law and order state, that's a lasting change. That's going to be a lasting change. And here's part of what I'm going to do. Use some of my political capital to help support candidates who are running for assembly, right, and Senate, and see if we can make some headway in breaking that supermajority. I will spend my political capital to do that. But here's another beautiful aspect of this opportunity for me as Attorney General. So the governor decided to put all of the elections of all of the district attorneys and the sheriffs on the presidential cycle. Because what he wanted more, they think there's more emotional voters in the presidential general election, more emotional voters. So they wanted emotional voters to be the ones that are making decisions on who our law enforcement officers are, right? The district attorneys and the sheriffs. Well, what he did was he set me up for a perfect opportunity, because when I'm the Attorney General, that presidential cycle is 2 years away from my election and 2 years before my next election. So guess what I get to do for 2 years? I get to go out and find the most rule of law, tough on crime, new leaders, new candidates, and I get to go out and spend my political capital and support them and run with them and help get them elected. So what I'm talking about doing in California is not just my sort of flash in the pan, the work that I can do on my watch for a few years. By the way, it is a 4-year term and another 4-year term, so I'm hoping for 8 years when I start this. But we're going to change the culture in California to get back to a rule of law and order culture, and hopefully through my support in off-year elections for me, but on-year elections, on presidential, for the DAs and the sheriffs, that we get new leaders in office with the sheriff's departments and the district attorneys, that they too believe in what I'm espousing, and they carry that forward as well. So I see this as a cultural change in California, that we get back to law and order.
Outstanding. Let's change that culture.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on in.
It's a pleasure.
Excellent. Thank you.
A special thank you to Michael Gates, candidate for California Attorney General. To support Michael Gates' campaign, scan the QR code on the screen. And be sure to follow Armed Citizens Legal Academy for our next Town Hall podcast featuring Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer.